Hey, Laura here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to sew an NPC style competition top and all the little secrets that come with it. I made my first competition suit back in 2014, and since then I have perfected the pattern to create this beauty that I have used to sell dozens of suits. Last month I finally took the time to digitalize the patterns I have used for my business, so if you are not feeling up to making your own pattern, I have left the link in the description where you can get mine. All you need to do is print the pattern file on letter or A4 size paper and make sure that the print scale is always set to 100%. This is the most important part. For example, on my computer it always defaults to something different, so I have to manually check where the print scale option is and set it to 100%. Or if you are going to a print shop, just tell them you need it printed at 100% scale and that's it. Once it's printed, each page has little test squares that you can measure to make sure everything printed correctly. Then, all you have to do is match up the letters inside these half circles on the pattern sheets. To do this, you can cut or fold the edge of each page with letters, and do it outside of the gray frame so you can line up A with A, B with B, and so on. You can use tape to connect the sheets until you end up with something like this. From here, you just need to select the size of the top you want to make. You can either cut out the size of the pattern you are using or trace it to keep the pattern intact for future projects. I personally like to keep my patterns on non-fusible interfacing fabric because it lasts way longer than paper and it's super easy to pin when I'm cutting the fabric. For this top, you will need to cut 4 triangular pieces, 2 in the main fabric and 2 in a stretch linen. Then, for this other piece, which is kind of like a triangle but without the top point, you will only need 2 pieces in the linen. You will also need to cut the strips for the straps using the main fabric. The pattern includes the different lengths I recommend for each strap, and you can cut the fabric using those measurements. But here is a tip. I recommend cutting just one long, continuous strip first. And then after sewing the strings, as I will show you later, you can then cut them to the length specified in the pattern. Now that you have got all your pieces cut, to put it all together you will need thread in the color of your main fabric and linen, 1/4 inch white elastic, and crystal connectors. And I have left a link in the description with all my recommendations for where I buy my supplies. It's a new day for me. Now with all the pieces ready, it's time to arrange them and start sewing. First, take the 2 shorter linen pieces and we are going to finish the top raw edges by folding over 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch and securing it with pins. Then go over it with a small zigzag stitch. On my machine, it's stitch number 4 and I set the width to 3 and the length to 3 as well. Then, very carefully, I sew along the edge of the fabric so that it's enclosed with the zigzag stitch. When it's finished, it looks like this. I do this for both of the shorter linen pieces. Once they are ready, we are going to take the main fabric pieces and place the linen triangles on top, with the wrong side of the linen facing the wrong side of the fabric like this. If you notice the linen ended up a little bigger than the fabric in some areas, like what happened to me, you can just trim the edges slightly so it doesn't stick out. After placing the linen pieces on top of the main fabric, place the shorter linen pieces on top of that. Then with the pieces arranged in this order, pin all around the edges like this. Next, we are going to sew a straight stitch along the bottom edge of the triangle, about 1/2 cm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And once the bottom is secured with that stitch, it's time to add the elastic on the sides of the top. To do this, mark where the elastic will start and end. I usually leave about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters without elastic, at both the beginning and the end of each side. And using a fabric marker, I measure the inch and make a mark on each side of both pieces. To sew the elastic, I use a zigzag stitch with a width of 4 and a length of 4 as well. So I first place the end of the elastic on the starting mark and backstitch to secure it. Then I continue sewing along the center of the elastic, stretching it as slightly as I go, but very slightly, not too much, just enough so that when I'm done, the fabric has gentle waves and is not overly gathered. I repeat this for each side of both triangles. Once the elastic is sewn from mark to mark, the fabric pieces will look like this. Now that the elastic is sewn onto the sides, I remove all the pins. Next, it's time to fold the elastic inward to finish the edges of the top, again using the same zigzag stitch. For this step, I don't use pins, I just carefully fold the fabric from the start, matching the width of the elastic, and then I keep the rest of the fabric snug against the edge of the elastic. I backstitch at the beginning and end of each side, and repeat this process for both pieces. And here is where the worst thing that can happen while sewing happened to me. The bobbin thread ran out just a little before I finished one of the sides. And doing a back stitch on the front of the top is not going to look very nice, so I had to remove the entire seam and start over. So make sure you have enough thread, especially when doing these steps, so you don't end up like me. Now with the sides finished, we are going to sew the channel for the strap that goes under the bust and ties at the back. To do this, measure 1 inch up from the bottom edge of the top and mark it all the way, following the rounded shape of the top in this area. Once you are done marking, fold the fabric so that the edge of the piece reaches the line you just marked. Since this part is rounded, it can be a bit tricky, but the best way to do it is to start by folding the center first and pinning it. Then fold and pin each end. And finally, fold and pin the spaces in between. By the time you are done, you will have a lot of pins to make sure that the fabric is evenly distributed and follows the curved shape. Do the same for the other piece of the top. And now to sew this part, we are going to use a very small zigzag stitch. In this case, I set the width to 2.5 and the length to 2.5. The most important thing here is to sew straight along the edge of the fabric, so that one side of the zigzag is on the fabric and the other is almost touching the linen fabric. Before you start sewing, make sure that the edges are folded inward neatly and that no folds are sticking out like this, because that can look a little bit messy and those little details can really take away from the quality of all of your hard work. Once you are ready to start sewing, backstitch a few times and go very slowly along the edge. If you want, you can remove the pins as you approach them, but honestly, I take the risk and almost never remove them. Then when you reach the other end of the piece, here's another little trick. If you notice that the fabric edge has shifted and is sticking out a bit, lift the presser foot and use a pin to gently push it back inside the piece. Then finish the stitch to complete the seam so it looks nice and clean. Once you have sewn these channels on both pieces, you can remove the pins and they will look like this. And now it's time to sew the straps for the top. I have a video where I explain how I used to do it and how I do it now using these two tools to save a lot of time. So I recommend you to watch it to understand everything in more detail and keep this video from getting too long. But basically, you need to fold the edges of the straps inward and then sew them using a zigzag stitch so they look like this. Once the straps are sewn, you can cut them to the length I recommend in the pattern for the neck straps and for the ones that go under the bust. Before attaching them to the top, we are going to add the connectors. I start with the center connector by threading the straps through the side rings, folding about 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch of the strap inward and securing it with pins. Then to finish the ends of the straps, I also fold them 5/8 of an inch and pin them in place. I repeat this step with the upper connectors to attach them to the fabric straps that tie at the back of the neck. Then to sew all of them in this position, I'll be using a straight stitch. Placing the fabric strip like this on the machine, I backstitch at the beginning and end of each seam. I then remove the pins, trim any long threads, and if the little bit of fabric left after sewing looks too long, I trim it a bit too, to make the work look cleaner. Now that the straps are ready, it's time to attach them to the top. I thread the top corner of the triangle through the connector, folding about 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters inward, and secure it with pins so it looks like this. Just like with the other straps, I secure them in place with a straight stitch. For this part, I leave the little bit of fabric attached to the connector the same length for extra security, as this area tends to stretch more when tying. Now I'm going to assemble the top with the strap that ties at the back. But when I'm making tops with crystals, I usually wait to add this strap until after the rhinestone design is complete. In this case, since there will be no rhinestones here, I will attach it now using a safety pin at the ends of the strap to pass it through the channels on each side of the top. Now the final step is the cups. For medium and larger sizes, I like to use these cups that don't have push-up. They just give the top a nicer shape. For smaller sizes, I use these other cups with push-up. And you can even play around by adding 2 cups on each side to see what you like best. This top is a medium size, which looks great for C or full B cups. I am an A cup, so it fits a little longer than the small size would. But with double cups it looks like this, and with single cups without push-up it looks like this. If you liked this video, thank you so much for sharing it with anyone you think might find it helpful. Remember that in your hands lies the power to turn the invisible into visible. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!